The morning sun cast long shadows across Harmony Point as Commander Jake Morrison watched his daughter Lisa pack her school bag. The research station hummed with quiet activity while scientists from dozens of worlds worked together on peaceful projects. For 3,000 years, humanity had lived this way, solving problems with words instead of weapons. Building instead of destroying, Lisa adjusted her blue uniform and smiled at her father. She was 12 years old with bright eyes that sparkled when she talked about her friends at the Intergalactic Youth Academy. Today she would join students from 47 different species to study ancient history and stellar cartography. The Academy floated in orbit around the peaceful world of New Geneva, a symbol of cooperation between all the races of the galaxy. Jake had served in the Human Defense Force for 20 years but had never fired a shot in anger. His duties involved exploring new worlds, protecting trade routes from space storms, and helping stranded travelers. The ships in his fleet carried scientific equipment instead of weapons. Their hulls were painted white with blue stripes, the colors of peace that humanity had chosen after the Great Reconciliation. Wars ended in 1847. The Galactic Confederation included 847 species spread across 12 spiral arms of the galaxy. Each member world contributed according to its abilities. Humans provided research, medical knowledge, and agricultural techniques. The Altarians offered their mastery of energy manipulation. The crystalline Vorthans shared their understanding of mathematics. Together they had built a civilization that spanned millions of worlds, but not everyone in the galaxy embraced peace. The Zephyrian Empire controlled vast territories through military might and ruled with an iron fist. Emperor Vexthal commanded fleets of black warships that enforced his will across a quarter of known space. His soldiers wore armor that gleamed like obsidian and carried weapons designed to inspire fear. The Zephyrians viewed humanity's peaceful nature as weakness and often mocked human diplomats. At galactic meetings, General Korth stood before a massive holographic display in the Imperial War Room on Zephyros Prime. The tall warrior's scarred face showed contempt as he studied intelligence reports about human colonies. His clawed fingers traced shipping routes and population centers while he spoke to his emperor about a plan that would test human resolve. Once and for all, the emperor's throne room was a monument to conquest. Banners from defeated worlds hung from the ceiling while trophies of war lined the walls. Vexthal himself was an imposing figure with golden eyes that burned with ambition. He had ruled the empire for 2 centuries and believed that only strength mattered in the universe. The idea that humans had voluntarily given up warfare seemed impossible to him. 3 human colony ships departed from Earth's orbital stations on what should have been a routine journey. The vessels carried families seeking new homes on the frontier. Worlds of Kepler's Edge, children laughed in the recreational areas while their parents made plans for their new lives. The ship's captains followed established trade routes that had been safe for generations. Captain Amy Rodriguez commanded the lead vessel New Horizons and felt confident about the journey ahead. Her crew included teachers who would establish schools on the new colonies and engineers who would build infrastructure. The other 2 ships carried similar groups of peaceful settlers who wanted nothing more than to raise their families under alien stars. The attack came without warning in the neutral zone between sectors. Zephyrian warships dropped out of hyperspace and surrounded the human vessels with overwhelming force. Their dark hulls bristled with weapons while their commanders demanded immediate surrender. The human ships had no choice but to comply since they carried no weapons and their shields were designed for cosmic radiation. Instead of military assault. What happened next shocked even seasoned Zephyrian officers. Instead of demanding tribute or territory, General Korth ordered his soldiers to separate all human children between the ages of 8 and 16. Parents screamed and fought as armed warriors dragged their sons and daughters away. The children cried for their families as they were loaded onto transport ships and taken to secure facilities deep in Zephyrian space. Lisa Morrison was among the 847 children seized that day. She clutched a small stuffed animal her father had given her while Zephyrian guards herded her into a cold metal compartment. The other children huddled together in fear as the transport ship jumped to hyperspace and carried them away from everything they had ever known. The news reached Jake 3 hours later through official diplomatic channels. His hands shook as he read the cold report that described his daughter as detained for educational purposes by Zephyrian authorities. He immediately contacted his superiors and demanded permission to organize a rescue mission, but was told to wait for diplomatic solutions. The Galactic Confederation's response was swift but toothless. They issued statements of deep concern and called for measured dialogue to resolve the situation. Representatives from hundreds of worlds gathered in emergency session to debate the crisis but took no concrete action. Many species feared provoking the powerful Zephyrian Empire over what some called an internal educational matter. Across human space, parents learned that their children had been taken. The news spread through quantum communication networks and triggered something that had been dormant for 3 millennia. Peaceful farmers put down their tools and asked about military service. Scientists abandoned their laboratories to study weapons technology. Teachers began organizing civilian defense groups while children who remained safe looked to the stars. With new understanding of the galaxy's dangers, Dr. Helen Carter studied reports from the seized colony ships and felt something she had never experienced before. The elderly archaeologist had spent her life uncovering humanity's peaceful past, but now found herself remembering stories her grandmother had told about the old wars. Somewhere deep in her mind, ancient instincts stirred like sleeping giants. Awakening from a long dream, the Emperor's plan seemed perfect from his perspective. He would break the human children and remake them as loyal servants of the Empire. Their parents would accept the loss, and the galaxy would see that even the most peaceful species could be conquered. But Vexthal had made a fundamental miscalculation about human nature that would cost him everything he had built over 2 centuries of conquest. Admiral Susan Blake had never expected to be called before an emergency session of the Earth Council. She walked through the marble corridors of the government complex in Geneva while her mind raced with possibilities. The Human Defense Force had been a ceremonial organization for so long that most citizens forgot it existed. Her ships explored distant nebulae and rescued stranded freighters but never engaged in combat. The council chamber buzzed with tense conversation as representatives from every human world gathered to discuss the crisis. President Maria Santos stood at the central podium with documents scattered before her. Her usually calm demeanor showed cracks of strain as she read reports from the seized colony ships. The faces around the room reflected a mixture of shock, anger, and something else that had been absent from human expressions for 3,000 years. Dr. Richard Stone adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat before addressing the assembly. As Earth's leading expert on alien psychology, he had spent decades studying how different species thought and behaved. But now he found himself examining his own people with growing concern. Something fundamental was changing in the human psyche, and he was not sure anyone understood what it meant. The psychologist's report described what he called ancestral recall, a phenomenon where genetic memories from humanity's violent past were suddenly surfacing after millennia of dormancy. Peaceful citizens across all colonies were experiencing vivid dreams about ancient battles. Farmers found themselves sketching weapon designs while teachers drew tactical formations. Children who had never seen violence were playing war games with disturbing accuracy. Captain Amy Rodriguez sat in a sterile debriefing room and tried to explain what had happened to her ship. The normally composed officer struggled to find words for the horror of watching children torn from their parents' arms. She had commanded vessels for 15 years but had never felt so helpless as when Zephyrian soldiers ignored her desperate pleas to negotiate. The reconnaissance mission to gather intelligence on Zephyrian facilities launched from a hidden base in the asteroid belt. Amy volunteered to lead the dangerous operation even though her crew had no combat experience. They modified a research vessel with better sensors and stealth systems, then set course for the Empire's border regions where intelligence suggested. The children were being held. What they discovered in the prison camps made hardened officers weep. Human children were subjected to brutal conditioning programs designed to break their spirits and remake them as servants. Lisa Morrison and her friend Danny Parker were among those showing signs of severe psychological trauma. The kids who had once laughed and played were now thin shadows of their former selves, their eyes dull with despair. The treatment facility on Korak 7 housed the youngest victims in cells, barely large enough for a single bed. Zephyrian guards used shock weapons to enforce discipline while automated systems delivered propaganda messages 20 hours per day. The children were forced to repeat phrases about human weakness and Zephyrian superiority until their voices became mechanical and lifeless. Back on Earth, something unprecedented was happening across human space. Citizens who had never held weapons began volunteering for military service in numbers that overwhelmed recruitment centers. The Phoenix shipyards received requests to convert passenger vessels into warships, while mining operations offered to provide raw materials for weapons production. Dr. Helen Carter led archaeological teams to locations that had been sealed for 3 millennia. The sites were marked only in the oldest historical records as places where humanity's ancestors had stored the instruments of war before embracing peace. Heavy machinery cleared away layers of concrete and steel that had been placed to ensure these weapons would never again see daylight. The underground vaults stretched for kilometers beneath major cities on dozens of worlds. Emergency lighting flickered to life as the first explorers entered chambers that had been sealed since the Great Reconciliation. What they found inside defied belief. Weapons and technology so advanced that current galactic civilizations looked primitive by comparison. Computer systems awakened from 3,000-year slumber and began displaying technical specifications for devices that most humans could not even pronounce. Manufacturing blueprints showed designs for starships that could cross the galaxy in days instead of months. Weapon schematics revealed armaments capable of destroying entire fleets with single shots. The most disturbing discovery was a vast database containing the complete military history of pre-peace humanity. Battle records showed a species that had conquered their entire solar system before achieving faster-than-light travel. Strategic analyses revealed tactical thinking so advanced that it made current military doctrine look like children's games. These were the records of a people who had been very good at war. General Paul Henderson studied the ancient files with growing amazement and horror. The elderly historian had spent his career documenting humanity's peaceful development, but now found evidence of a warrior heritage that had been deliberately hidden. The ancestors who achieved peace had not destroyed their weapons. They had sealed them away, hoping future generations would never need them again. The Galactic Confederation finally agreed to mediate the crisis. After weeks of bureaucratic delays, their proposed solution arrived through official diplomatic channels and struck human leaders like a physical blow. The Confederation suggested that humans simply accept the loss of their children and focus on having more offspring to replace those taken. The Zephyrian ambassador spoke through a mechanical translator when he addressed the Confederation Assembly. His words dripped with contempt as he described human children as raw material that would be shaped into useful servants of the Empire. He dismissed parental concerns as emotional weakness that had no place in galactic politics. President Santos read the Confederation's proposal 3 times before her hands began to shake with rage. She had dedicated her life to peaceful diplomacy and international cooperation, but now faced a situation where words meant nothing. The cold calculation that her people's children were expendable revealed the true nature of galactic politics. The President's address to the Earth Council would be remembered as the moment when humanity's long peace began to crack. She stood before representatives from every human world and spoke, with a voice that carried the weight of 3,000 years of restraint finally reaching its breaking point. Her words were simple, but carried implications that would reshape a galaxy. They have touched our children. There will be consequences. The assembled leaders sat in stunned silence as the full meaning of her statement sank in. For the first time in 3 millennia, humanity was preparing for war. But what none of them yet understood was that their species had not forgotten how. to fight. They had simply chosen not to exercise that terrible knowledge until now. The deepest vaults beneath Earth's surface had remained sealed for longer than most galactic civilizations had existed. General Paul Henderson descended through layers of security that would have impressed the most paranoid species in known space. Each level revealed new horrors from humanity's past. Weapons designed not just to kill but to utterly destroy any opposition with ruthless efficiency. The final chamber stretched beyond the reach of their lights, filled with manufacturing systems that hummed to life as human technicians approached. Ancient artificial intelligence awakened from 3,000 years' sleep and began displaying holographic interfaces in languages that predated galactic common tongue. The machines seemed eager to resume their original purpose after the long hibernation. Chief Engineer Lisa Young studied blueprints that made her hands tremble with a mixture of awe and terror. The specifications showed starship designs that incorporated technologies she had only dreamed possible. Engines that could fold space-time, armor that could regenerate damage in real time, and weapon systems that existed purely to end life as efficiently as possible. The first prototype warship took shape in the hidden construction facilities of the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. Workers who had spent their lives building peaceful research vessels now found themselves assembling instruments of war with disturbing familiarity. The genetic memories that Dr. Stone had identified seemed to guide their hands as they connected. Systems that had not been active for millennia, the vessel that emerged from the construction bay looked like nothing else in galactic space. While other races built ships that resembled their creators, this craft seemed designed by predators who understood that form should follow function. Its hull flowed in smooth curves that deflected sensor scans while its weapons remained hidden until needed. The engineers designated it Phoenix, a name that carried implications about death and rebirth. Captain Tony Mitchell had commanded research vessels for 20 years but felt his pulse quicken as he stepped aboard the Phoenix for the first time. The bridge systems responded to his presence with interfaces that seemed to anticipate his thoughts. The artificial intelligence that ran the ship spoke in a voice that carried subtle menace beneath polite courtesy. The first test flight revealed capabilities that astounded even the Phoenix's creators. The ship could accelerate at rates that would have crushed human crews if not for the inertial dampeners that bent physical laws. Its stealth systems made it invisible to every sensor technology in galactic use. Most importantly, its weapons could punch through Zephyrian shields like they were made of paper. The targeting computer demonstrated tactical thinking that adapted and learned from every simulation. It analyzed enemy fleet compositions and identified weak points with predatory precision. When multiple targets presented themselves, the system calculated firing solutions that would create cascading failures. Throughout entire battle groups, intelligence reports confirmed the locations where Zephyrian forces held human children. The facilities were heavily defended fortress worlds that had never been successfully attacked in 8 centuries of imperial expansion. Their shields could withstand bombardment from entire fleets while their weapon platforms could destroy approaching vessels at impossible ranges. The rescue mission targeting the youngest children launched without fanfare or ceremony. Phoenix appeared in Zephyrian space like a nightmare materialized from humanity's darkest dreams. Captain Mitchell watched sensor displays that showed 30 enemy vessels moving to intercept while defensive platforms powered up weapons that could vaporize continents. The battle lasted exactly 12 minutes and 17 seconds. Phoenix moved through the enemy formation like a predator among prey, its weapons finding targets with surgical precision. Zephyrian shields that had protected their worlds for centuries collapsed under the assault of weapons that operated on principles their science could not comprehend. The rescue operation proceeded with mechanical efficiency, while Zephyrian defenders tried desperately to understand what was happening. Phoenix deployed assault shuttles that cut through fortress walls with focused energy beams and extracted 200 children before vanishing back into hyperspace. The entire operation concluded before enemy reinforcements could even begin. To respond, Emperor Vexel received the first reports while holding court in his throne room on Zephyros Prime, the initial accounts seemed impossible. A single human vessel had destroyed significant portions of his frontier fleet and disappeared without sustaining damage. His advisors suggested the reports were exaggerated by panicked survivors, but the evidence was undeniable. The holographic recordings showed Phoenix moving with impossible grace through formations that should have obliterated any vessel, its weapons fired with precision that suggested intimate knowledge of Zephyrian ship design, while its defenses shrugged off attacks that would have vaporized conventional warships. Most disturbing of all, the ship seemed to anticipate enemy tactics before they were implemented. General Korth studied the tactical analysis with growing unease. His military career had been built on the assumption that Zephyrian technology was superior to anything else in the galaxy. The idea that humans possessed weapons more advanced than his own was impossible to accept. Yet the evidence floated before him in undeniable detail. The Emperor's reaction was swift and predictable. He ordered the immediate mobilization of his home fleet and demanded that human space be invaded before they could deploy more vessels like Phoenix. But his commanders hesitated because they were beginning to understand that humanity might not be the weak species they had assumed for 3,000 years back in the Sol system. Production facilities that had been dormant since the Great Reconciliation roared to life with impossible speed. Automated systems began manufacturing weapons and starships at rates that defied every economic model in galactic history. Each new vessel incorporated lessons learned from Phoenix's first engagement, creating an evolving fleet of nightmares. The rescued children arrived at medical facilities that had been hastily converted from research stations. Lisa Morrison barely recognized her father when he embraced her after weeks of Zephyrian conditioning. The reunion was joyful but tinged with the knowledge that hundreds more children remained in enemy hands. Dr. Helen Carter interviewed the rescued kids and documented their experiences with clinical precision. What she learned about Zephyrian conditioning programs filled her with cold rage that had nothing to do with scientific objectivity. The Empire had not simply taken human children, they had tried to break them psychologically and remake them. As servants, the implications of Phoenix's success spread through human space like wildfire. Citizens who had lived their entire lives in peace suddenly understood that their ancestors had been warriors without equal. The weapons and ships emerging from hidden facilities were not just tools of war, they were instruments of justice wielded by a species that had chosen peace but never forgotten how to fight. Admiral Blake coordinated the next phase of operations from a command center that had materialized from sealed vaults beneath the Pacific Ocean. The facility contained strategic planning systems that could analyze galactic military deployments and identify weak points across entire spiral arms. For the first time in 3 millennia, humanity was preparing to wage war on a scale that would reshape known space. The assembly yards hidden throughout human space worked without rest to produce vessels of war. Admiral Blake watched production reports that showed hundreds of ships taking shape in facilities that had not existed weeks earlier. Each warship incorporated improvements learned from previous battles, creating an evolving fleet that grew more deadly with every engagement. Operation Reclamation began at exactly 800 standard time across 4 star systems simultaneously. Human strike forces appeared without warning at 17 Zephyrian facilities where intelligence suggested children were being held. The coordinated assault demonstrated tactical planning that made galactic military academies look like amateur training programs. Commander Steve Walsh lead Strike Group Alpha toward the fortress world of Kethmore, where the oldest human children were reportedly imprisoned. The planet had been considered impregnable for 5 centuries, protected by overlapping shield systems and weapon platforms that could destroy entire fleets. No enemy force had ever successfully breached its defenses. The human fleet approached Kethmore like predators stalking wounded prey. Their ships moved in formations that confused Zephyrian sensors, while their weapons remained powered down to avoid detection. The attacking vessels looked almost peaceful until the moment they revealed their true nature with devastating effect. The battle began when Strike Group Alpha dropped out of hyperspace within the planet's defensive perimeter. Zephyrian commanders had seconds to realize that human ships could somehow bypass their early warning networks before the first weapons opened fire. Energy beams that operated beyond known physics punched through shields that had protected the world for centuries. Walsh watched his tactical display as enemy defensive platforms tried desperately to target human vessels that seemed to exist in multiple locations simultaneously. The Phoenix-class warships used technology that bent space-time around their hulls, making conventional targeting impossible. While their own weapons found targets with surgical precision, the fortress world's defenders fought with desperate courage, but found themselves outmatched by opponents who seemed to anticipate their every move. Human ships flowed through defensive formations like water through a broken dam, their weapons systematically dismantling installations that had been built to last forever. Lisa Morrison heard the sounds of battle from her cell deep within Kethmore's central prison complex. Zephyrian guards ran through corridors shouting orders in their harsh language while explosions shook the massive structure. The human children who had been broken by months of conditioning suddenly looked up with hope that they had thought was lost forever. The extraction teams moved through the fortress with mechanical efficiency. Human soldiers wearing armor that made them look like angels of death cut through blast doors with focused energy beams and neutralized guards with weapons that left no survivors. They spoke gently to terrified children while methodically eliminating every threat in their path. Danny Parker was among the first kids rescued from the deep cells. The 12-year-old boy had been subjected to conditioning programs designed to break his spirit, but his eyes lit up when he saw human soldiers. The warriors who had seemed so terrifying to Zephyrian guards knelt beside frightened children and spoke in voices filled with infinite patience and love. The battle for Kethmore became legendary throughout galactic space. Against impossible odds, human forces punched through defenses that had protected the world for 5 centuries and extracted every human child while leaving the supposedly impregnable fortress a burning ruin. The entire operation concluded in less than 6 hours. Similar scenes played out across 17 star systems as human strike forces demonstrated capabilities that redefined galactic understanding of warfare. Their ships moved like living things through enemy formations while their weapons found targets, with precision that suggested intimate knowledge of Zephyrian technology and tactics. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as reports flooded communication networks. The peaceful humans who had been dismissed as weaklings for 3,000 years were systematically dismantling the Zephyrian Empire's military infrastructure. Their tactics were ruthless, their technology superior, and their motivation absolute. Emperor Vexthal paced in his war room while advisors brought increasingly desperate reports. Half of his frontier fleets had been destroyed or scattered while human forces seemed to appear wherever they chose. The empire that had ruled through fear for 8 centuries was being torn apart by opponents who fought with cold efficiency. General Korth made the decision to negotiate directly with human commanders despite his emperor's orders to fight to the last ship. The architect of the child seizure plan had begun to understand that his strategy had awakened something terrible that could not be stopped through conventional warfare. The general's communication reached Admiral Blake aboard her flagship. As human forces prepared for the final assault on Zephyros Prime, Korth offered to return the remaining children in exchange for a ceasefire, and promised that the Empire would never again threaten human interests. His voice carried desperation that would have been unthinkable weeks earlier. Blake's response became part of military legend throughout known space. Her words were delivered with the cold precision of someone who had calculated the cost of mercy and found it insufficient. You will return our children. The war continues until justice is served. The final battle occurred in orbit around the Zephyrian homeworld as their entire remaining navy gathered to make a last stand. The engagement covered 3 star systems and involved thousands of ships. On both sides, energy weapons that could sterilize planets exchanged fire while reality itself seemed to bend under the strain of advanced technology. Human vessels moved through the massive battle with coordination that suggested they shared a single mind. Their weapons found weak points in enemy formations, while their defenses absorbed attacks that should have destroyed them. Each ship fought as part of a greater whole that adapted and evolved throughout the 18-hour engagement. The Zephyrian fleet included vessels from 800 years of conquest, representing dozens of different technological approaches to warfare. Their commanders used every tactic in their considerable experience, while their weapons fired with the desperation of a species facing extinction. But human forces had been designed by ancestors who understood war better than any living civilization. Jake Morrison watched the battle from the bridge of a rescue vessel positioned safely behind the combat zone. His daughter Lisa stood beside him, still recovering from her ordeal, but determined to witness the final confrontation. The father, who had spent 20 years as a peaceful explorer, now commanded ships designed to ensure his child would never again face such horror. The battle reached its climax when human forces achieved orbital supremacy over Zephyros Prime and demanded the Empire's unconditional surrender. The Zephyrian home fleet had been reduced to scattered survivors while their planetary defenses lay in ruins. For the first time in 8 centuries, the Emperor's world was at the mercy of foreign invaders. Emperor Vexthal stood in his damaged throne room and listened to reports that confirmed his empire's complete defeat. The being who had ruled through fear and conquest now faced the consequences of threatening the children of a species that had voluntarily given up warfare but never forgotten how to wage it with terrible efficiency. Emperor Vexthal stood in chains before a human military tribunal in what had once been his own throne room. The golden-eyed ruler who had commanded the fear of 800 worlds now faced judgment from the species he had dismissed as weak. The charges were simple and undeniable: crimes against humanity's children. The punishment would be equally straightforward. Admiral Blake presided over the proceedings with the same cold efficiency that had characterized the entire war. She read the evidence of Zephyrian crimes, while holographic displays showed the conditioning facilities where human children had been tortured. The Emperor's attempts to justify his actions fell on deaf ears because humanity had moved beyond the need for explanations. The trial lasted exactly 3 days because the evidence was overwhelming and the verdict had never been in doubt. Vexthal was found guilty of ordering the seizure and abuse of human children, a crime that humanity had decided carried only one possible sentence. The execution was carried out with the same mechanical precision that had characterized every human military operation. The Zephyrian Empire ceased to exist as a political entity when human forces dismantled its government and redistributed its territories to species that had suffered under imperial rule. Worlds that had been enslaved for centuries suddenly found themselves free, while their former oppressors faced justice from the peoples they had conquered. Lisa Morrison walked through the memorial gardens that had been established on every human world to honor the children who had been taken. She was 15 now and bore the invisible scars of her experience in Zephyrian custody. The girl who had once dreamed of becoming a teacher now studied military history with the intensity of someone who understood that peace required constant vigilance. The rescued children returned to their families forever changed by what they had witnessed and endured. They became symbols of why humanity's old ways of absolute pacifism had proven insufficient in a galaxy that still harbored predators. Their experiences were documented with clinical precision to ensure that future generations would understand the cost of NAIV. Dr. Helen Carter established the memorial archives in a facility that had once housed weapons of mass destruction. The repositories contained detailed records of every human child's experience in Zephyrian custody, serving the dual purpose of honoring the victims and educating the galaxy about the precise nature of the crime that had awakened humanity's wrath. The Galactic Confederation faced a new reality as humanity emerged as the dominant military power in known space. Representatives who had once dismissed human concerns now spoke with careful respect when addressing Earth's ambassadors. The species that had chosen peace for 3 millennia had demonstrated they retained the capacity for war when their families were threatened. President Santos addressed a joint session of the Galactic Assembly in words that would be studied by xenopolitical scholars for generations. She stood before representatives of 847 species and spoke with the authority of someone whose people had just reshaped galactic power structures through the application of controlled violence. Her speech was carefully crafted to reassure the galaxy, while establishing clear boundaries that no species would dare cross again. She began by reaffirming humanity's commitment to peaceful cooperation and diplomatic solutions to conflicts. The assembled delegates listened with attention that bordered on reverence because they now understood the true nature of human restraint. For 3,000 years we chose peace, the president continued, her gaze sweeping across representatives who now regarded humanity with newfound respect and barely concealed fear. We built gardens where others built fortresses. We raised children where others raised armies. We hoped the galaxy had evolved beyond the need for primitive responses to conflict. The pause that followed carried weight that pressed against every delegate in the vast assembly hall. Species that had dominated their neighbors through military might suddenly understood that humanity's peaceful nature had been a choice rather than weakness. The implications of that revelation would reshape diplomatic relationships throughout known space. You have learned that our choice of peace was exactly that, a choice, Santos said with quiet finality. We remain committed to diplomatic solutions, to trade and cooperation, to building a better galaxy for all our children. But let our response to this crisis serve as a reminder, touch our families, and you will discover why we chose peace in the first place. The president's final words became galactic law through the simple expedient of being absolutely true. Some weapons are too terrible to use. That does not mean we have forgotten how to use them. The Human Defense Force returned to its traditional missions of exploration and research as their warships were once again converted to peaceful purposes. But every species in the galaxy now understood that humanity's peace was backed by military capabilities that exceeded anything in known space. The transformation from scientific vessels to instruments of war could be accomplished in days rather than decades. Jake Morrison resumed his duties as a research station commander. But his daughter's experience had changed him forever. He established training programs that ensured human civilians would never again be helpless when faced with aggression. The lessons learned from the Zephyrian War became part of standard education for all human children. The memorial services, held throughout human space, honored both the children who had suffered and the ancestors whose sealed weapons had made rescue possible. Citizens who had lived their entire lives in peace now understood that their safety had always depended on the restraint of a species capable of terrible violence. Danny Parker grew up to become a diplomat who specialized in preventing conflicts before they could escalate to violence. His experiences in Zephyrian custody gave him unique insights into the minds of predator species and helped him identify threats before they could mature into crises that required military solutions. The galaxy settled into a new equilibrium where humanity's peaceful nature was respected rather than dismissed as weakness. Trade relationships flourished because other species understood that humans would honor their agreements and protect their partners. The phrase, "Remember the Zephyrian response," became shorthand for the consequences of threatening human families. In the end, humanity achieved something unprecedented in galactic history. They fought a war so decisive and overwhelming in its demonstration of their capabilities that it actually reinforced the peace they had maintained for 3 millennia. The galaxy learned that there are some lines that should never be crossed, and harming human children was the most absolute of those boundaries. The children who had been taken grew up in a galaxy where their species was no longer underestimated. They became teachers, scientists, explorers, and diplomats who carried the memory of their ordeal as a reminder that peace must sometimes be defended through strength. Their legacy ensured that no future generation of human children would face the horrors they had endured. The Zephyrian War became a cautionary tale told throughout galactic space about the dangers of mistaking restraint for weakness. Humanity returned to their gardens and laboratories and schools, but the galaxy never forgot that beneath their peaceful exterior lay the sleeping arsenal of the most effective warriors in known history.